Welcome to week 2. Quite a bit of reading this week. Quite a bit of reading every week. Remember my advice from week 1. Don't get overwhelmed. Make sure you stay ahead. I'm going to review some thoughts from the 2 texts that we'll review this week, starting with Dewhurst chapter 1. Your authors correctly note that life is rarely simple when it comes to matters of communication. It's quite frankly one of the reasons I love communication. Early in my naval career, I was an engineer. And the thing about engineering is that it's relatively simple, right? I mean, once you learn the basics of, physics or chemistry or whatever engineering you're in, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And that makes it pretty simple. Once I got into public affairs, I loved the fact that there is no right answer. It's a lot more complex, a lot more nuanced. And it's what's kept me going in this career field for many, many decades, and hopefully a few more decades to come. Now, one of the reasons why communication is so complex is because there's not really an agreed definition for employee communication. But one thing I do know, and your authors note this as well, is that employee communication is not a one-way street. Too many people, too many leaders think they can just send out the information and our employees will be responsible enough to pick it up and grab it and use it. That's not the way it works. We have to get that two-way communication. What do our employees need? What feedback are they getting directly from the customer or however you define that, right? Internal customer, external customer, other people for whom we are serving, okay? Now, communicators, when you ask them, they describe themselves as people who help other people achieve their goals. I love that definition. Essentially, it means that instead of the value of our work coming directly from what we do, the benefits come through helping others. So imagine you're working at a nonprofit. That nonprofit has perhaps fundraising goals. If you were able to help them help with those fundraising goals, then you are helping the organization. Perhaps you work for a corporation. How are you helping that corporation's bottom line? Anyway, you look past kind of what you're doing as a communicator and better understand what the organizational goals are and how are we as communicators helping that organization leaders make those goals, okay? Now, conversely, modern leaders, they understand and they appreciate that communication is a big part of their job, especially the more senior you get. I teach leadership classes, almost as many of those as I do communication classes, and one of the things I try to stress for leaders is the importance of communication. Okay, you find me a successful leader, and behind that leader will be a successful communicator as well. Okay, your authors then move to another topic, which is a great one for us to explore, and that's talking about this rate of return. So it's been the rage for quite some time to try to define or describe our return on investment, the ROI, or however you want to do that. Is it worth it, right? And that's important. You don't want to, just do things for the sake of doing them. However, in the soft science that we are in, unlike, my former career field as an engineer, or maybe if there are others who are in different career fields, it's a little bit hard, right? I knew that when I was responsible for a gas turbine engine, we could measure things. What are the RPMs? What is the compression? What is the speed of the ship? All those things are measurable. They're knowable. They're objective, meaning there's no argument. We're either going 30 knots or we're not going 30 knots. We're either getting a fuel efficiency rating of whatever we're supposed to get or we're not. Not so with communication. There is some data, some hard data or quantitative data that we can capture. But trying to match that up with organizational goals is one of our challenges. And your authors talk about how defining return on investment with a high degree of accuracy is challenging, time-consuming, and may not always be helpful. Now, that doesn't mean we have to push it aside. We can't. Most of us, if we're in a larger organization, work for people who understand the bottom line, and we have to be able to speak in that language and define, or at least describe, our efforts and how they contribute to that bottom line. But don't get wrapped up with it. There are ways to define what we do, describe what we do, measure what we do, without it becoming the measurement becoming what we spend all our time on instead of the communication efforts itself. I remember years ago when we were, just starting to explore whether or not the Navy would allow social media to be used. And I would often, be asked, what's the return on investment if we get a Facebook page? To which I would sometimes reply, I'll be happy to describe what the return on investment is for social media as soon as you can describe the return on investment of answering the phone or responding to an email or having another meeting. Because when you look at social media, it's a form of communication. And that's what I wanted to use our social media for, a form of two-way communication. It was less about a new tool and more about how a new opportunity to get that two-way dialogue. Okay. Inside Dewhurst Chapter 1, there's a figure on page 10, figure 1.2. Take a look at that. They're describing the 4 value spaces, and there's a whole lot going on with that topic that we're not going to go through here. But that figure does a pretty good job of helping at least introducing you to that topic. Okay. Next, we'll move to Miller, section 1. I love this quote. Pretty websites don't sell things. Words sell things. So when I was the public affairs officer at Navy Recruiting Command, one of the things that we would often get asked is whether we could change the command's websites, because we were at headquarters. But the way the recruiting system was set up then is that there were 26 recruiting districts, all of whom had their own commanding officer and wanted to put their print on their command. Nothing wrong with that. But oftentimes they would say, I want to change the website and do this, that, or the other. And much of what they wanted to do made the website more complicated. It made it harder for their customer, their potential recruit, or an influencer to find what they needed. And so I would remind them when we did our public affairs training, part of which was the web, arguably the most successful website is 6 letters and a box. Now they've added this little image that they sometimes change, but of course we all know that Google is highly successful. And part of the reason why it's so successful is that it's simple, right? Make it simple. The customer should be able to answer these questions, according to your authors, in about 5 seconds, whether they're looking at our website, other marketing material, any type of communication. What do you offer? How will it make my life better? And what do I need to get it? Okay, so think about that. Put your customer first and put your customer glasses on, whether it's a website or a brochure or an email that's coming out from your senior leaders, while we're talking about internal communication. And don't forget that when I use the term customer in terms of this course, oftentimes I'm talking about the internal customer first, right? Because they're the ones that will influence how successful we are. Your authors also share an Alfred Hitchcock quote defining a good story as, quote, life with the dull parts taken out. And your authors argue that good branding is the same, and I agree. Oftentimes what happens with our communication is that we try to make it so encompassing, so accurate, inclusive sometimes that it's hard to find the message through all the chaff, right? We've got just a whole bunch of things going on. It's like, no, we need something simple. Sometimes mission statements do this. And remember, mission statements are as much a communication to internal employees as they are to our external customers. Try to make it simple, memorable, something that you can grab onto and remember. Our mission statement, our brand, I guess you could say, for our department, the American Connections Media Outreach, is we share sailors' stories. Simple. Now, we have a much more grandiose mission statement that goes in the official publications, but ask any of my employees, and hopefully they'll be able to tell you, we share sailors' stories, right? Very simple, something we can hang on to and focus our efforts towards. All right. Another excellent point by the author is a reminder that experienced writers know the key to great writing isn't what they say, it's what they don't say. In other words, the more we're able to cut out, the better the book, the better the screenplay, the better the communication, whatever that communication is. Get it down to as few words as possible. You'll find this when I'm helping you on your papers and your assignments. Cut out things that don't add value. You may be familiar with the mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal. He's quoted as saying, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time." Now, it sounds like it's backwards, right? But the idea is that you write your thoughts out and you didn't have time to edit it. Sometimes that happens with your assignments, and you can tell that there's a lot of words that don't have a lot of meaning. Okay, so you may see that Pascal quote again in some of your writing. All right, page 21 in chapter 2. Look at that diagram. I think that'll help kind of set you up for success in terms of a basic understanding of those principles that we're trying to get across there. And then, of course, you go to chapter 3. That introduces this 7 steps to building a story brand, what they call SB7. We're not going to go into that whole thing here for the sake of time, but just understand that the customer is the hero of the story. Or in other words, the customer should be the focus of your efforts, not your brand. Too many people, understandably, focus on what they want, what their organization needs, rather than looking at the customer. When we position our customer as the hero and ourselves as the guide, we will be recognized as a trusted resource to help them overcome their challenges. And then they'll use our product, our service, our nonprofit, whatever organization we're in, they'll know that we have their best interest in mind. As always, make sure you stay ahead, stay engaged, and of course, enjoy your time of learning.